All right. Today we're jumping into something messy. We're talking about the brilliant and kind of chaotic birth of a single science. And what's wild is this isn't just any science, it's the science of you, the science of psychology.
So let's just get right to it. Imagine you're one of the very first psychologists. You're living in an age that's completely obsessed with hard, physical facts, and you've got this one huge problem. How on earth do you make a science out of something nobody else can even see? Your mind, your thoughts, your feelings. How do you study that?
And back in the late 19th century, they came up with this simple, almost poetic definition for it: the science of mental life. I mean, that sounds nice and neat, right? But underneath that simple phrase was a massive, massive challenge. A challenge that would basically split the entire field into these competing tribes, all fighting for decades. You gotta understand the world psychology was born into. The dominant idea at the time was something called positivism. And this wasn't just some dusty old philosophy. It was a real, hardcore, show-me-the-proof attitude. Thinkers like John Locke had already planted this idea that the mind is just a blank slate that gets written on by experience. So the scientific world at the time had absolutely zero patience for studying the invisible stuff inside our heads. The rule was simple: if you can't see it, measure it, and test it, it's not real science. It's just humbug.
So, okay, you've got this huge obstacle. How do you get around it? Well, the first pioneers had to get really, really creative. And their first big idea was solution A. If you want to study the mind, let's just try to look inside it. But, scientifically.
And this is where a guy named Wilhelm Wundt comes into the picture. He had this radical idea. What if we treat the mind like a chemist treats a chemical compound? So he goes and creates the world's very first psychology lab. And his whole goal was to systematically break consciousness down into its tiniest measurable parts. Things like sensations, perceptions, feelings. He was basically trying to create a periodic table for the mind.
But right away, this whole super systematic, almost mechanical approach, it hit a major snag. Because over in America, a completely different idea was starting to bubble up. People started asking, wait a minute, if you try to chop up the mind into all these tiny little pieces, don't you kind of destroy the very thing you're trying to study?
Which brings us to solution B, and a guy named William James. He was this brilliant American thinker who came along with a totally different, and honestly, way more poetic, vision for what psychology could be.
See, for William James, consciousness wasn't some static object you could just pin down and dissect in a lab. No way. He said it's a stream, a river. It's constantly moving, it's personal, and his point was so powerful. You can't understand a river by just analyzing a few individual drops of water. The whole point of the river is the flow.
And this is what was so cool about James. He wasn't that interested in just abstract theories. He wanted to know, what's the practical application? What's the cash value, as he called it? He wanted a psychology that could actually help you live a better life. Just look at these steps for forming a new habit. I mean, this stuff is just as powerful and relevant today as it was more than 100 years ago. Okay, so let's recap. We've got Wundt, who's trying to break the mind into its parts. We've got James, who says we need to look at its flow. And then a third group comes along with a solution that was even more radical. They basically said, you know what? Why are we even talking about the mind? Let's just forget the mind entirely.
Yeah, you heard that right. This was the battle cry of a new school of thought called behaviorism, led by this really forceful guy, John B. Watson. And his argument was just brutally simple. He said, look, science deals with what we can observe, period. We can't see thoughts. We can't see feelings. But you know what we can see? Behavior. So he argued, let's just make that the entire focus of psychology.
And this was a fundamental shift. I mean, a huge one. The central question of psychology completely changed. It went from Wundt's question, what do you feel, to Watson's question, what do you do? It was no longer about looking inward. It was all about observing the outside, stimulus in, response out. And the mind itself? To the behaviorists, it was just a black box. We don't know what's in it, we can't see in it, so for the purposes of science, it just doesn't matter. So get this. Just as behaviorism is aggressively looking outward, completely ignoring the mind, another revolutionary movement, this time over in Vienna, is doing the exact opposite. They're looking inward, but deeper than anyone had ever dared to look before.
This, of course, brings us to Sigmund Freud. And his solution,
Well, it was maybe the most unsettling of them all. He came along and said that the real mental life, the stuff that actually matters, isn't the part you're even aware of. Nope. The real action, according to Freud, is happening in the unconscious, this deep, dark, churning world of repressed desires and hidden conflicts that are secretly pulling the strings on everything you do.
And Freud framed our personality as this constant drama happening inside our own heads. He didn't see one unified you. He saw a battle between three characters. You've got the id, which is like this blind, pleasure-seeking monster that just wants what it wants right now. Then you have the superego, which is like this strict, judgmental parent telling you all the rules. And then, caught right in the middle, is the poor ego, who's just desperately trying to manage this whole mess and deal with the real world.
And Freud's whole thing was that this hidden drama is always trying to bubble up to the surface. The classic example, of course, is the Freudian slip. You know, when you accidentally say one thing when you really meant to say another? For Freud, that's not just a simple mistake. Oh no. That's your unconscious mind yanking back the curtain for just a second and accidentally revealing what it really thinks.
All right, so let's take a step back. We've got 4 totally different competing solutions for what psychology should be. You can break the mind into parts, you can watch its flow, you can ignore it completely, or you can dig down into its hidden depths. So after all that fighting, which one actually won?
Well, here's the crazy part. The answer is kinda none of them. And all of them. No single theory ever delivered a knockout punch to the others. But the fight itself, that's what was so important. Because in this huge struggle to define itself, the simple science of mental life exploded. It became a science of behavior, a science of the unconscious, of habits, of kids, of animals, you name it. The whole field just blew wide open.
And the result was incredible. This new, expanded psychology didn't just stay locked up in a university lab. Its ideas started pouring out into the real world. They started to reshape everything: how we teach our kids, how companies advertise to us, how the military designs its gear, and maybe most importantly, how we even think about ourselves.
And that really leaves us with this one powerful final thought. A journey that started with this pretty simple, hopeful goal, let's understand the mind, ended up giving us this whole toolkit of powerful techniques. Tools that are now used everywhere to measure, predict, and even influence our behavior. So the legacy of these early pioneers, it's not just some academic science. It's a fundamental part of the world that you and I live in right now.